The cold did not arrive with drama. It crept in slowly, methodically, the way it always did, stealing heat without asking permission. Commander Daniel Cade stood submerged to his shoulders in slate-colored water off the northern coastline. Body still, breath controlled. The surf pressed against him in slow, relentless waves, each one testing balance, patience, discipline. The temperature clawed through neoprene past muscle toward bone. He did not fight it. Fighting wasted energy. Endurance required cooperation. Around him, the rest of the platoon held the same position, faces rigid, eyes fixed forward, bodies trembling at the edge of what was tolerable. This was the final phase of cold exposure conditioning, the point where shivering stopped helping and started becoming a liability. Past this threshold, only will remained. Daniel cataloged sensation without emotion. The ache in his calves, the numbness creeping into his fingers, the faint hitch in the breathing rhythm of the operator to his right, corrected after a few seconds. No one spoke. No one needed to. This was the price of entry. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments where are you watching from. It helps more than you know. The instructor's voice echoed across the water, distorted by wind, irrelevant. The real test was internal, the quiet negotiation between instinct and resolve. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice suggested warmth, relief, release. Daniel acknowledged it, labeled it, and dismissed it. Control lived in the space between heartbeats. Hours later, the world changed completely. The joint training base sat in the high desert, a temporary sprawl of dust-coated structures, generators humming, air heavy with fuel and heat. Exercises like this were meant to foster cooperation. In practice, they exposed fault lines. Conventional units clustered together. Recon teams kept to their lanes. Daniel's Special Operations Unit existed slightly apart, moving with economy, speaking only when needed. They were respected quietly, resented loudly. Daniel stood near a line of vehicles with his senior enlisted advisor, Chief Rowan Petros, watching heavy trucks rumble past, throwing tan dust into the air. Petros said nothing. He didn't need to. Command inspections were theater, and theater demanded patience. The reason for the tension announced itself soon enough. A column of armored vehicles rolled through the compound, flags snapping sharply. Rank insignia gleamed where dust hadn't yet settled. Major General Conrad Bale stepped out with the confidence of a man accustomed to silence following his arrival. He was tall, broad, immaculate. His uniform looked untouched by the environment around him. His chest displayed decades of ribbons, many earned in offices far from the friction of modern ground combat. Bale believed in hierarchy, in projection, in presence, and he did not trust what he could not dominate. The platoon was ordered to assemble. They formed up with precision, boots aligned, posture neutral, equipment immaculate. Daniel stood at the front, muscular frame relaxed but grounded, expression unreadable. When Bale reached him, the general stopped longer than necessary. His eyes flicked to Daniel's insignia, then to his face. A thin smile appeared, not friendly. "Commander Daniel Cade," Bale read aloud, letting the silence stretch. "Impressive resume. Very contemporary." The word landed wrong. "In my day," Bale continued, voice loud enough for the entire formation, "leadership was forged under pressure, mud, blood, not classrooms and theories." He gestured vaguely toward Daniel without looking at him again. "These newer doctrines risk dulling the edge. War does not reward restraint." The platoon remained motionless, but Daniel felt it. The subtle tightening, the collective awareness. Bale wasn't evaluating readiness, he was asserting dominance. Daniel met his gaze calmly. His pulse did not change. He had faced men with explosives and nothing to lose. A general with a fragile ego registered as a different kind of threat. Bale continued, his speech wandering through nostalgia and volume, until his eyes returned to Daniel with renewed interest. "Talk is cheap," the general said. "Let's see something practical." The desert seemed to hold its breath. "Unarmed demonstration," Bale announced. "Commander Cade and I, right here." A ripple of shock moved through the formation without a sound. This wasn't training. It was humiliation disguised as instruction. Daniel understood the trap immediately. Refusal would be painted as weakness. Compliance carried risk. Victory would invite retaliation. Loss would validate Bale's narrative. There was no clean outcome. Daniel unclipped his sidearm with deliberate care and placed it on a nearby crate. He removed his outer blouse, revealing a simple training shirt stretched across a powerful frame built for function, not display. "As you wish, General," he said. Evenly, the circle formed. The heat pressed down. Dust drifted through the air. Bale stepped forward with confidence and a grin, convinced size and rank were enough. Daniel settled into a neutral stance, hands open, weight balanced, calm, present, ready. The general believed he was about to make a point. The platoon knew better. As the general lunged forward to prove dominance, he failed to realize that discipline was about to meet ego, and only one of them understood what real control looked like. The general did not hesitate. Major General Conrad Bale stepped forward with the confidence of a man who had never been challenged in a way that mattered. He rolled his shoulders once, loosened his neck, and spread his feet wide in a stance that relied on mass and forward pressure. It was a posture meant to intimidate, not to adapt. Daniel Cade watched without expression. He noted the weight distribution, the tension in the shoulders, the way Bale's eyes locked onto him, already convinced of the outcome. This was not a soldier preparing for uncertainty. This was a man preparing to perform. The desert heat pressed down, silent and heavy. A loose circle formed around them, operators standing still, faces neutral, eyes sharp. No one spoke, no one interfered. Every person there understood the rules, written and unwritten. Bale cracked a grin. "Whenever you're ready, Commander," he said, voice thick with confidence. "Try not to embarrass yourself." Daniel said nothing. He shifted his stance slightly, settling his weight evenly, hands open and low. No aggression, no theatrics, just balance, stillness, readiness. Bale mistook calm for hesitation. He lunged. It was a straight-line rush, all momentum and size, a move meant to overwhelm by force alone. Daniel did not meet it head-on. He stepped half a pace to the side, pivoting smoothly as Bale's mass carried forward. Daniel's hand made brief contact with the general's elbow, not striking, just guiding. At the same moment, his foot swept behind Bale's trailing leg. The movement was economical, almost gentle. The general stumbled. Surprise registered on Bale's face just before gravity took over. He hit the dirt on his hands and knees, dust puffing up around him. A murmur rippled through the unit, quickly swallowed by discipline. Bale pushed himself up, face flushed, jaw tight. "Lucky," he snapped. "You won't get that again." He charged a second time, slower now, throwing a wide, looping punch aimed at Daniel's head. Daniel leaned back just enough for the fist to cut empty air, then stepped inside the arc of the swing. His left hand secured Bale's elbow. His right hand slid to the shoulder. He applied pressure to a specific point, rotating the joint with leverage instead of strength. Bale's knees buckled as pain flared through his arm. Daniel guided him down, controlling the descent, forcing the general onto one knee. The position was unmistakable. Total control. Daniel held it for a single breath. Then he released and stepped back. Bale rose slowly, chest heaving, rage burning through embarrassment. The pretense of a friendly demonstration was gone. This was no longer about proving doctrine. It was personal. Bale roared and rushed again, abandoning technique entirely. Heavy punches flew, fueled by anger and pride. Daniel moved like water, slipping just out of reach, letting each blow pass where he had been a fraction of a second earlier. The general was strong, but he was predictable. Daniel parried a strike aimed at his ribs, redirecting it just enough to expose Bale's center line. He stepped in, closing the distance before the general could reset. This time, there was no subtlety. Daniel drove the heel of his palm upward, striking cleanly under Bale's chin. The impact was precise, controlled, devastating. Bale's head snapped back, his eyes unfocused, legs faltering. Before he could fall, Daniel was already behind him. One arm slid around Bale's neck, the other locked into place. A textbook rear choke, applied with discipline, not rage. Daniel did not squeeze. He did not need to. The position alone was enough. Bale struggled instinctively, uselessly. Each movement tightened the hold. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. The desert seemed to go completely silent. The unit watched, frozen. Daniel held the position for a few seconds longer than necessary, long enough for the lesson to settle. long enough for the truth to become undeniable. Then he released. Bale stumbled forward, collapsing to one knee, coughing violently. His face was red, eyes wide, chest heaving as he fought for air. He did not look at Daniel. He did not look at anyone. The demonstration was over. The silence that followed was heavier than the heat. Bale snatched his jacket from the ground and shoved his arms into it, movements stiff and furious. Without a word, he turned and walked back toward his convoy, aides scrambling to keep up. The engines roared. Dust rose. And then he was gone. The circle loosened slightly. The unit remained disciplined, but something had changed. Daniel felt it without needing to look. Respect had shifted. Chief Petros stepped forward and picked up Daniel's sidearm, handing it back without comment. The gesture carried weight. Daniel nodded once in acknowledgement. Before anyone could speak, a runner sprinted toward them from the operations tent, breathless. "Commander," he said urgently, "we've got immediate tasking. High-value target confirmed." The air changed instantly. The desert did not care about pride, rank, or humiliation. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, real work was waiting. Daniel secured his weapon and turned toward the tent, already focused. Whatever Bale had intended to prove that morning no longer mattered. The mission always did. As Daniel stepped into the operations tent, he had no way of knowing that the general's wounded ego was about to follow him into the field, and that its consequences would put every life in the unit at risk. The operations tent hummed with low urgency. Screens glowed against canvas walls, satellite imagery frozen mid-scroll, coordinates highlighted in sharp contrast. Daniel Cade stood at the center of it, broad shoulders squared, posture relaxed but alert. The confrontation outside had already been filed away where it belonged. Irrelevant. Only the mission mattered. An intelligence officer spoke quickly, voice steady. A high-value insurgent leader had been located in a remote mountain village less than 30 kilometers from the base. Signals intelligence confirmed his presence. Human sources verified movement patterns. The window was narrow. By first light, the target would relocate. Daniel absorbed the details without interruption. The terrain was unforgiving. Steep-sided valley, limited approach routes, civilian structures clustered tight. Every variable pointed to one conclusion: stealth. Daniel outlined the plan with calm precision. A high-altitude, low-opening insertion under cover of darkness, silent overland movement, contained infiltration, capture if possible, elimination only if necessary, minimal footprint, maximum control. It was clean, efficient, proven. The team nodded as one. They had rehearsed variations of this plan dozens of times. It played directly to their strengths. Daniel was about to give the order to prep when the tent flap snapped open. Major General Conrad Bale strode in. His face was still flushed from the earlier humiliation. The confidence was back. But now it was brittle, sharpened by something dangerous. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. "This changes things," Bale announced, unrolling a large paper map over the digital display. "We go in hard." Daniel looked at the map, then back at the general. "Sir, a direct aerial assault compromises surprise," he said evenly. "The valley restricts maneuverability. Rotor noise will alert the target and escalate resistance." Bale slammed his hand onto the table. "Enough. I'm done watching operators creep around in the dark. We send a message." He pointed decisively. 2 light helicopters, fast rope insertion, overwhelm the compound, speed and firepower." The room went still. Daniel felt it. The subtle shift from tactical debate to ego-driven command. Bale wasn't adjusting strategy. He was rewriting it to reclaim authority. "With respect, sir," Daniel said, voice calm but firm. "That approach increases risk to the team and civilians. My plan—" "Your plan is timid," Bale snapped. "My orders are final." There it was. In a combat zone, a direct order carried weight no matter how flawed it was. Daniel held Bale's gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Yes, General," he said. "Your orders are clear." The damage was done. Night fell fast. 2 helicopters skimmed low across the desert, rotors biting the air, noise rolling ahead of them like a warning. Daniel sat strapped in beside his men, the cabin vibrating around them. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The first warning sign came from the wind. What had been a steady breeze turned violent without transition. Sand rose in thick spirals, visibility collapsing in seconds. The pilots' voices crackled over comms, strained. "Zero visibility," one called. "I can't see ground or lead bird." The helicopters bucked as turbulence slammed into them. Daniel gripped the frame, already calculating options. "Abort insertion," the pilot shouted. "Losing lift." The world outside vanished into a churning wall of sand. "Set us down on the eastern ridge," Daniel ordered. "It's defensible." The pilot fought the controls, guiding the aircraft down through chaos. The landing was hard, controlled but unforgiving. Harnesses strained, gear rattled, then silence. The engines died. The storm screamed. They were down, blinded, communications dead. Daniel unstrapped and moved immediately, voice cutting through panic. "Status, injuries first." Reports came back one by one. Bruises, scrapes, no critical wounds. Behind him, Bale was shouting into a dead radio, panic bleeding through authority. "Where's the other helicopter? Where's my air support?" No answer came. Daniel ignored the noise. He organized a defensive perimeter, spacing his men with practiced efficiency, assigning thermal imagers to compensate for the storm. Purpose returned. Fear retreated. Bale stormed toward him. "Who authorized you to take command?" Daniel didn't look up. "You did, sir," he replied evenly. "When you issued orders without contingencies." The general froze. Daniel turned then, eyes steady. "What are your next orders?" Bale opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The storm did not care about rank. Daniel stepped past him. "We moved to higher ground. The enemy heard us come in. They will be hunting." The team moved. The first shots came from the darkness. Automatic fire tore through the storm, muzzle flashes appearing and vanishing like ghosts. Daniel dropped low, returning controlled fire, directing movement with calm clarity. This wasn't chaos. It was consequence. As the firefight intensified and visibility vanished completely, Daniel realized the greatest threat wasn't the enemy in the storm, but the general whose decisions had put them there. The storm swallowed sound. Gunfire cracked and vanished almost instantly, muffled by sand and wind, leaving only vibration in the chest and the taste of grit between teeth. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Shapes became guesses. Distance became irrelevant. Daniel Cade moved low and steady, one hand signaling, the other guiding his weapon with muscle memory alone. This was the environment where panic killed faster than bullets. He would not allow it. "Shift left, 10 meters, he called calmly. "Use the rocks. Slow your breathing." The team responded instantly, bodies moving where his voice directed them, trust overriding fear. They had trained for worse than this. They had survived worse. What made this different wasn't the enemy. It was the mistake that brought them here. A burst of automatic fire chewed into the ground where they had been seconds earlier. Daniel rolled, came up on one knee and fired controlled rounds into the muzzle flash. The return fire stopped. He didn't wait to confirm. Movement mattered more than validation. Behind him, Major General Conrad Bale stumbled over loose stones, struggling to keep his footing. His weapon hung awkwardly in his hands, grip too tight, movements jerky. This wasn't a command post. This wasn't a briefing room. This was real. "Stay behind cover," Daniel ordered, not turning. "Do not advance." Bale bristled. "You don't give me orders." Daniel finally looked at him. "I'm keeping you alive," he said. "That's the priority." Another explosion of gunfire tore through the storm, closer now. The enemy was adjusting, using the chaos to probe for weakness. Daniel felt it immediately. They were being tested, just like at the fence, just like in the desert compound. Pressure reveals truth. Daniel redirected 2 operators to higher ground, creating overlapping fields of fire. He repositioned the rest into a tighter formation, forcing the attackers to expose themselves if they pressed closer. The shooting slowed, then stopped. For a moment, there was only the storm again. Daniel knew better than to trust silence. He moved forward carefully, scanning through thermal optics. Shapes flickered at the edge of range, retreating, not advancing. The enemy had not expected resistance this organized after such a chaotic insertion. They had expected fear. Daniel signaled a halt. "We hold," he said. "They'll regroup." Bale's breathing was loud, ragged. He wiped sand from his eyes with shaking hands. The arrogance from earlier was gone, replaced by something raw and unguarded. "You said this wouldn't happen," Bale snapped weakly. Daniel didn't rise to it. "I said it would if we came in loud." The general said nothing. Minutes stretched. The storm began to ease, wind dropping just enough to carry sound again. Somewhere downslope, an engine coughed to life, then died. The second helicopter. Daniel felt the weight settle in his chest. They were alone. Comms crackled suddenly, faint, broken, but alive. A distorted voice cut through. "Ground element, this is command. Repeat. Respond." Daniel grabbed the radio. "This is Cade. We're pinned but operational. One aircraft down. Request extraction window at first light. Static." Then acknowledgement. As he lowered the radio, a sharp cry cut through the night. One of the operators went down, hit in the leg by a lucky round fired blindly through the storm. Daniel was there immediately, dragging him behind cover, applying pressure without hesitation. The wounded man clenched his jaw, refusing to make a sound. "You're good," Daniel said quietly. "Stay with me." He looked up to see Bale watching. Frozen. Horror etched across his face as blood soaked into the sand. This was the cost of decisions made from pride. Daniel finished securing the wound and rose. "General," he said evenly, "you're coming with me." Bale stared. "Where?" "Forward," Daniel replied. "If we stay, they box us in. If we move, we control the ground." Bale hesitated. Daniel didn't. He stepped off into the storm, trusting the team to follow, trusting discipline to hold where ego had failed. They moved through broken terrain, using elevation and shadow, forcing the enemy to react instead of plan. By the time first light bled into the sky, the attackers had vanished completely. The valley fell silent. Daniel stopped on a rocky rise overlooking the compound. They were never meant to assault this way. Smoke curled faintly from a distant structure. The target was gone. The mission was compromised. Behind him, Bale sank to his knees, shoulders slumped, finally understanding the scale of what had nearly happened. Daniel looked out across the valley, jaw tight. They had survived, but survival was not victory. As the sun rose over the valley and the full cost of the night became clear, Daniel knew the reckoning was no longer on the battlefield. It was coming from inside the command chain. Daylight exposed everything the storm had hidden. The valley below looked deceptively calm, washed in pale morning light, smoke thinning into the air as if nothing violent had happened. Broken rotor blades lay half buried in sand where the second helicopter had gone down, its fuselage scorched but intact. The crew was alive, shaken, bruised but breathing. Daniel Cade stood on the ridge and watched medics work with quiet efficiency. He felt no relief yet. Relief came after accountability. Major General Conrad Bale sat on a flat rock a short distance away, helmet off, uniform stained, hands resting uselessly in his lap. He looked smaller now, older, stripped of the certainty that rank had always provided. Extraction arrived late that morning. Back at the base, the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations stopped when Daniel passed. Eyes followed Bale instead. Word traveled fast in places like this, not the polished version, the real one. An emergency debrief was called before anyone had time to clean the dust from their gear. Daniel stood before a panel of senior officers, posture straight, voice even. He walked them through the operation from start to finish. The original plan, the altered orders, the weather shift, the compromised insertion, the casualties narrowly avoided. He did not editorialize, he did not accuse. He let the facts speak. Bale spoke next. His explanation was different, disjointed, defensive. He leaned heavily on authority and intent, less on outcomes. He framed the storm as bad luck, the resistance as unforeseeable. One of the panel members stopped him mid-sentence. "General," the officer said calmly, "were you advised against the insertion method you selected?" Bale hesitated. Daniel did not look at him. "Yes," Bale said finally. "I was." Silence followed. Another officer leaned forward. "And you overrode that recommendation?" "Yes." "Based on what operational necessity?" Bale opened his mouth. Nothing came. The room felt very still. The inquiry expanded quickly after that. Flight logs, weather reports, recorded briefings. Testimony from pilots and operators. A pattern emerged that was difficult to ignore. Daniel returned to duty while it unfolded. He trained. He led. He kept his unit focused. He did not discuss the general. He did not speculate. He understood something Bale had not. Revenge was loud. Justice was patient. Weeks later, the findings were released. Major General Conrad Bale was relieved of command pending further review. His career did not end with a courtroom spectacle or public disgrace. It ended quietly, the way most failures of leadership did, through loss of trust. Daniel received a formal commendation for leadership under fire. He accepted it without comment and returned to work. The desert went back to being just desert. On his final evening at the base, Daniel stood alone outside the barracks, watching the horizon darken. The unit moved around him, familiar sounds of preparation and routine filling the air. Chief Petros joined him, hands in his pockets. "He won't forget this," Petros said. Daniel nodded once. "Neither will we." Petros studied him. "You could have handled him differently." Daniel didn't answer immediately. "He made his choices," Daniel said at last. "So did I." That night, as the base settled into uneasy quiet, Daniel knew the story was almost over. Not because he had won, but because the system had finally caught up. What Daniel didn't know yet was that the final reckoning would not come from an investigation, but from one last decision that would define his career forever. The order came without ceremony. Daniel Cade was called into headquarters early the next morning, not for another inquiry, not for a briefing, but for a decision. The kind that arrived quietly and changed everything without asking permission. The room was small, neutral, no flags, no audience. Across the table sat two senior officers whose reputations were built on restraint rather than volume. They did not speak at first. They let silence do the work. One of them finally slid a folder across the table. Inside was a reassignment order. Daniel read it once, then again. He was being offered command of a newly formed Special Operations Task Group, one designed specifically to prevent exactly what had happened in the desert. Independent operational authority. Direct reporting. No intermediaries chasing credit. No ego-driven interference. A safeguard. "This unit exists because of what you did," the officer said evenly, "and because of what you refused to do." Daniel closed the folder. "I didn't set out to change policy," he said. "We know," the other officer replied. "That's why this works." Daniel accepted. There was no applause, no handshakes, just a nod and a shared understanding that responsibility had a weight most people never felt. Later that day, Daniel stood before his team one final time in the desert. No speeches, no ceremony. He thanked them for discipline, for trust, for surviving something they never should have been placed into. They understood. Chief Petros shook his hand firmly. "They put the right person where it matters," he said. Daniel watched them load out, the familiar shapes of men and equipment moving with purpose. When they were gone, the desert felt emptier than it ever had. Weeks passed. Daniel's new command took shape quietly. Far from attention, planning replaced reaction. Structure replaced improvisation. Failures were addressed before they reached the field. Somewhere else, Conrad Bale faded into administrative silence. There were no interviews, no defenses. The institution moved forward without him. Daniel never spoke his name again. On a cool evening months later, Daniel stood on a training range as dusk settled, watching a new generation move through drills with discipline and restraint. The lessons were the same, the environment different. Leadership was not volume, it was responsibility. He thought back to the moment in the desert when ego had nearly killed them all. The moment control had mattered more than force. The moment restraint had become the sharpest weapon in the room. Daniel turned away from the range as lights came on one by one, satisfied not with victory but with alignment. The story had ended where it needed to, not with revenge, with accountability. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.